In this video, we're going to talk about sustainability. And I'll start by recalling the ideas of Thomas Malthus. He was a political economist in 19th century England. He was really concerned with food production and population growth. He thought we had a tendency as a species to overproduce and that food production would not be able to keep pace. Now, it turns out he did not account for the role of technology. Technological improvements would increase food production, but he was onto something. He was concerned that growth would not be sustainable. And this is something that we're still thinking about today. Sustainability and whether present consumption can still continue into the future. Now, where did this idea come from? How did sustainability get on the public agenda? Well, it started in the 1960s and 1970s with the first images of Earth from space. Famous photo of Earthrise taken by Bill Anders on the Apollo 8 program. And then again, Apollo 17 took another picture that's known as the blue marble. People started to realize that the Earth was finite. It takes on a whole different meaning when you could actually see it from outer space. And so that really changed people's idea about resource consumption. Not long after that, some of the same computer techniques that were used by the Apollo space program were used by a team of researchers led by Dennis Meadows. And what they did was they crunched some numbers and tried to project population growth and whether resources could keep up. And they did suggest that there would be a limit to that growth, where population would outstrip resources. A very Malthusian view, similar to Thomas Malthus. So that got people thinking about consumption as well. The Brundtland Commission report, which was the short name for the World Commission on Environment and Development, also put out a report. And in that report, they coined a term called sustainable development. And they defined it as the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future. And that's a definition that is still with us today. So these three events really contributed to advancing the cause of sustainability on the public agenda. When we talk about sustainability, we're typically referring to three pillars that do need to be in balance: economics, the environment, and the social sphere. When we focus too much on one of those, then that sort of arrangement is not sustainable. For example, we could focus entirely on economic development, and that would have a catastrophic effect on the environment. Similarly, our social well-being, our ability to interact with each other, the way we live our lives, could be jeopardized if one of the other spheres was not in balance. So balancing all three of these is a good goal for trying to ensure sustainable development. Now, sustainability is also a term that we might hear in a business context. There's a corporatization of sustainability as many businesses try to incorporate environmental consciousness as a tool. And maybe for some of them it's just a branding tool, but it is something that is being incorporated into business models. Many hedge funds and pension funds, for example, are divesting from investments in fossil fuels and related technologies. That is something that we're seeing more and more of. There are legitimate corporate efforts to do things like this, but there are other efforts to just seem like they're doing something green. And we call those greenwashing. And then greenwashing is an analogy of painting something green, something that isn't green, and painting it green to seem sustainable or to market yourself as having an environmental awareness. One example I like to harken back to is British Petroleum. Famous oil company rebranded itself as Beyond Petroleum and got this fancy new logo that very much tried to appropriate images of the environmental movement. So that's an idea of greenwashing, taking something that might not be that green and making it seem like it is with, in this case, just a change of logo. Now, sustainability itself is not a controversial idea. It might seem like a very political term, but it isn't. If you think about it, a small business, any small business owner needs to have a sustainable business model. Otherwise, the business will not last into the future. Marathon runners need to have a sustainable pace. If they're going too fast at the beginning of the race, that pace is not sustainable and they will bonk in the second half. Even something like spending, your own personal credit card spending. It can get out of control at times like Christmas or maybe in the summer vacation. You can't really sustain that for an entire year. That type of spending would be unsustainable. Now, the challenge comes when political elites try to use sustainability or the environmental movement as a political wedge issue. And that's something that does very much happen. So when we think about sustainability or the environmental movement as being controversial, the ideas itself aren't controversial, but it's political elite cues that signal division one way or the other. So just to recap, the idea of sustainability, environmental protection really got on the agenda in the 1960s and 1970s with the Apollo space program, first images of Earth from space. The idea is to balance present consumption with future consumption. It's sort of rooted in the theory of intergenerational equity, that we've got to save something for our kids and our grandkids. And then it's also something that is more and more being appropriated by business and political elites, sometimes legitimately, and other times it's really just marketing or greenwashing.